everyone. Welcome to our Stallion seminar. Appreciate you joining us today. Hopefully this next 60 minutes will be insightful and you'll learn something. And of course, you can always ask questions at the end. So if you do think of any, make sure you stick around for the end of proceedings. If you want to enter the Lucky Door Prize, 2 members' tickets to Flemington, the QR code is inside the auditorium as you walk through the door. We'll announce that at the end. We must thank AgriFutures for their support of these seminars. We're doing these, we're trying to do these every year in New South Wales and here in Oakland. So we hope you enjoy them and they're very informative for you. And AgriFutures recently released their size and scope report, and they're an organisation that invests in our long-term growth and sustainability of all rural industries and obviously our breeding and racing industry. And the recent report that came out found that this Australian breeding industry is the second largest in the world and contributes $1.68 billion to our national economy. That report was in 2022-23, and we support more than 9,000 jobs full-time. So it's an amazing industry, and that kind of research then gives us the facts to go out and advocate for our own industry, for funding, for infrastructure. So Ryan Arnell, who's here today, he is our rep here. Stand up, Ryan, so everyone can see who you are. If anyone wants to find a little bit more out about AgriFutures, round of applause. Great to have you here. I'll introduce our panel. I know many of you will know the faces here, but Anthony Thompson down the end, a 7th generation member of the Thompson family. Anthony, you've been instrumental in continuing the legacy of Widden Stud, founded in 1867 and home to so many breed-shaping sires, Todman, Vane and Marskay, and of course Zoostar, who's staring down the barrel, I think, of his first premiership, well-deserved this season. And your experience has spanned stints with trainers John Morrish, Cambridge Stud in New Zealand, Vinery and Kentucky, alongside European agent Luke Lillingston. Widden is located in the Hunter Valley, as we know, and standing Zoostar, but recently acquired a Victorian base and strongly supporting it with some new stallions like Southport Tycoon and Cogburn is going to New South Wales, another one announced on the roster this year. Lisa Manning, in the middle there. Lisa, you bring 2 decades of experience in the thoroughbred industry and currently serves as Darley's Australia's nominations manager in Victoria. Your career began with a diploma of horse industry management and roles at leading farms including New Haven Park, Reville Farm and Vinery, and you're passionate about pedigrees and stallions, and you've played a key part in promoting sires like Street Boss, Cylinder and Blue Point more recently. Sam Matthews, very popular member of our Victorian industry down there, no doubt. You're originally from WA. You wrote this yourself, of course, so this is what I'm reading out. You followed in the footsteps of your family tradition of racing and breeding, and you have the role of general manager at Swettenham Stud at the moment. And you were an accountant by trade. What happened? Decided to get into the racing and breeding industry. You've got experience in retail management as well, recruitment, thoroughbred sales companies. It's a long list of roles you've had, and you're a strong advocate for our Victorian breeding industry since commencing with Swettenham quite some time ago. And I know you've played a key role as well in Toronado's career here in Victoria. You're a key figure there at Swettenham. So Ryan McAvoy, you're the last one to get introduced. General Manager of Bloodstock at Rosemont Stud. You've brought over 2 decades of experience in the thoroughbred industry to your current role, and you began your career at Widden Stud, launched your career, you could say, where you advanced from the hands-on role to head of marketing and stallion nominations, and you've been instrumental in promoting stallions and fostering industry relationships. I know you wanted me to mention a little bit later on about your key role you played in Zoostar coming to Widden Stud in the Hunter Valley. You made sure that you wanted me to mention that one. A proud Victorian, you're very passionate about this breeding future here in the States. So, and you're an avid Carlton fan, so I've been told not to hold that against you. As a non-AFL fan, I'm not quite sure what that means. Let's start with the questions. We're going to start with the topic purchasing stallions. Anthony, your first cab off the rank. Widden acquired a share in Southport Tycoon following his Australian Guineas victory, and we've just seen him parade outside. Talk us through the strategic considerations behind investing in a colt mid-racing career versus what you would do at a yearling sale when you're looking at stock yourself. How do you go about deciding which one you're going for, when you're going to pull the trigger? Can you talk us through those considerations that you make?
Strategic decisions on stallion investment is really buy a good stallion when you can. They're very hard to get your hands on a good stallion. The competition is ferocious. So the strategy around it is, if you identify a horse you like and you think he can be a good stallion and make a difference, do whatever you can to get your hands on him. And every stallion deal I've done has been different. They've tried and failed on a good few, and we've been successful on some. But Southport Tycoon was a horse that obviously sort of came on the radar after his Guineas win. And I was talking to Kieran Maher, and Kieran said, this horse's data is off the charts. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, his length of stride, his recovery, what he's doing. He said, I was kind of weighing up whether to run him in the Coolmore or run him in the Guineas. I reckon I could have won either. And that really caught my attention. And he said he can win a Group 1 over 6. So at that stage, there were some smaller owners in the Bennett Syndicate who were happy to sort of cash out. So we started buying an interest in him at that stage. And that price, I guess, was a price we should have bought a lot more of him at. At that stage, it was $6 million. So not to be sneezed at, but it was a really good way to get an interest in the horse. We didn't have a controlling interest, but we had an interest. And that set us up well. After he came out, won the Manikato, Arrowfield made a big offer, Yulong made a big offer. We're sitting at the table seeing those offers and in a position where we can counter, and that was really the advantage. But there's so many sides to a stallion deal and so many parts to it. And at any stage, whether it's you see a yearling that you think is going to be the horse, or you see a horse win a trial or win his first start, as a stud master, your phone's always on and you're always looking. And just that bit of intel from Kieran really just helped me on that commitment to Southport. And then seeing the horse, when I saw him, and you just saw him, he's just written Tycoon all over, and he's just perfect. So you couldn't not but then go all in, and we sort of went chips in after that.
Andy, would it be fair to say that in this very commercial, competitive environment that we are in terms of stallions in this country, you've probably got in your head an ideal way to buy a stallion or approach an ownership group, but are you very much at the hands of the horse's owner? You have to be very proactive on your toes and fire the bullet when someone else fires a bullet?
Yeah, I don't have as many bullets to fire as some of the other blokes, so I've got to shoot pretty straight. I don't have the shotgun, I've got a slug gun, I think. But we're trying to work with the owners to get what they want as well. And the thing about the people who own these horses, predominantly they're successful, they're wealthy, and they've achieved a lot in their own world, and the racing's a bit of a side, a big investment and a passion, but it's not their main game on the whole. And those guys are looking about what the long-term future of the horse is and what's really in it for them. And as you see with a good stallion, you can always, whatever's on the table today to sell a horse, if the stallion's going to be as good as we think he's going to be and can be a meaningful stallion, the money's there to be made long-term over the next 15, 20 years. The annuities will come and the money will come. So if we can do a deal which gives the horse every opportunity, if the owner wants to stay involved, they can stay involved. If they want to cash out, we're happy to try and buy them out and just try and set something up that suits everyone. And as I said, every stallion deal is different.
Ryan, Rosemont's been really proactive in forming these colt syndicates. What are the key factors you assess when selecting yearlings for potential stallion prospects? Like, how do you balance the pedigree, the conformation, and also the market trends? Schwartz, we saw Parade out there as a recent example, purchased as a yearling, as you mentioned out there, Group 1 winner, set to stand at Rosemont this coming season. So how do you assess those factors when forming those syndicates and selecting yearlings?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all those factors, Jem. And one, important to keep a really open mind. Look, you're buying yearlings. You're not trying to reinvent the wheel. A nice horse is a nice horse, but ultimately you go into that space with your principles, and I think but perhaps a yearling that you might consider is going to be a 7-figure plus yearling. You've got to be super stringent and super rigid with your fundamental principles. Perhaps a horse that you feel might slip under the radar, you could be a bit more speculative on, and perhaps be a bit braver on certain things. But with respect to Schwartz, he, I think from the first time we saw him parade there at Widden, you sort of noted in your catalogue, well, he's going to be a big banger, and then you sort of worry about that the next day. And then, I think the key thing for us was to stick to the principles. So one, and the two main things from my point of view was, if you're going to spend that sort of money for your partners, one, they have to be by a gun stallion, and two, they have to be from a gun farm. And so two, he ticked those boxes. A Zoustar colt, born, bred, raised at Widden, and then it was the layers.
Thanks, Mako. Still working for me.
And then it was the layers on top of that he needed to, a horse like that needed to meet. So one, attitude. I think the last time we saw him was the day before the sale, and he paraded like a jet. I was a little concerned. His second dam was by food peg, so I thought, shit, I don't want to see any resemblance of that horse's attitude in this horse before we go and buy him, because he'd be an expensive gelding otherwise. And he had great drive through his hocks. He moved well, and sort of head collared Anthony. And said, "Hey, listen, how do you rate this horse?" And I know how highly you thought of him, and that gave us all a bit of confidence. So, I think if you stick to your principles and hold them really highly, particularly on those sort of horses, you'll be okay. But nerve-wracking anyway.
There's a lovely little sort of intertwining story between the two of you. Obviously, Ryan, you've worked at Widden and taught Anthony everything that you knew. And then you've gone and bought Schwartz off Widden, and he's won a Group 1. I mean, where do you feel? Where's your head at? Obviously, we all want to succeed, but do you feel at some point, do you think, oh, bugger, that's one that got away, or where are you at?
No, I mean, I'm proud that's what we do. We don't keep those horses to race, and I've really been so pleased for these guys, and Rosemont, Mytho, Mako, mates, and John O'Shea. So being a sort of part of that ride and sharing, it's been fantastic. I mean, nothing makes you prouder than seeing a horse you've bred and sold do really well, and seeing people that work for you do really well. So I'm right on board with all that. I'm just glad I didn't listen to Mako when he bought another horse off me who was Horse of the Year called Dissident, and he told me I should buy him as a stallion. I was bloody glad I didn't do that, that's for sure.
Maybe that's 1-1. And if you raced all these colts, you'd be broke, so you kind of got to sell them in the sale ring. Lisa, Darley's been well known for their breed to race model, but also stands horses like Too Darn Hot, who's co-owned by Watership Downs. What are the benefits of standing and shuttling a horse like that, and broadening your breeding and racing program with a horse like Too Darn Hot?
Thanks, James. There's a lot of benefit, obviously, from standing those shuttle stallions that we bring over here. Godolphin's obviously well known as a breed to race model mostly. However, they do splash out occasionally with the at the yearling sales, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere. But when they identified Too Darn Hot early doors, he was very much the sort of horse that they were looking for as a successor to Dabawi, who we know is one of the greatest stallions to stand at stud, and the greatest stallions to stand at stud in England. So he was obviously on the radar very early, and they jumped in and purchased 50% off Watership Downs, and obviously he became what he became. So it was very important for us to get him down here as a son of Dabawi, who doesn't shuttle here anymore. He was a Group 1 horse. He's from a Group 1 mare. He's by a Group 1 stallion. He's the best of the best. To get that sort of horse down here and be able to use him ourselves, but to also offer him to breeders is really exciting. Obviously, most people know that the shuttle stallion has been quite, it's been a bit of a 50-50 sort of a angle that everybody has on those sorts of horses, but it can't be denied that they've had an amazing impact on our industry over here. So, you know, to get the likes of him here was amazing, and he was obviously well sought after his first, second, third seasons, and you know, they've sold well in the ring, and obviously he's gone on to be what he has become on the racetrack, which is absolutely amazing. You know, to have him back here this year is unreal, just for us to use him and to be able to offer him to breeders, and you know, standing sons of his at stud. Obviously this year we've got broadsiding, so it's it's really important.
And a mare like Winks visiting him this season as well, recently announced, Too Darn Hot.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a massive honour to be able to say that Winks is visiting this year, so very excited. You know, she's physically, it's a great mating, pedigree, it's a great mating, and breed to the best and hope for the best.
This is going to end up like a Stallions promotions panel in a minute. Use the opportunity. Sam, Swetnam's recently focused on acquiring sons of some champion sires, I'm Immortal by Vinny, Wooded by Wootton Bassett, Toronado by High Chaparral, and Lofty Strike by Schnitzel. When it comes to these stallion deals, I guess it's a similar question to before, but how important is the pedigree? But how important are these relationships within the industry so you can get big breeders to support you? How important are those?
Yeah, I think it's important to have that sort of big banger stallion sire, Wootton Bassett or Schnitzel or Vinny or whatever, or Zoostar. It allows you not to have to educate everybody about that particular stallion. It's already halfway done for you, and you can sort of ride on the coattails to a degree of something else that's having a bit of success. But the relationships are more important than anything else from our point of view, and I think having a conversation with, like Anthony said before, with the owner at a stage where it might be a trial winner, it might be a maiden winner, it might be a listed winner, but not waiting until everybody else works it out. I think it's first in, best dressed, and relationships are the key to success in our opinion, because if Anthony's got a slug gun, we've got a BB gun, maybe an air rifle, so you've got to get it right at the right time. Sometimes we're throwing Nerf bullets out, seeing how we go. So I think relationships trump all of that most of the time, but there has been a few that we've made offers on. We've offered $1 million, they've been done for 10 million. Other ones that we've offered 5 and they've been done for 15 million. So the valuations are what we value them at, but the relationships are the key to our success.
And you know, relationships in getting the stallions as well, from your perspective, Toronado, the Al Shakab connection with Adam Sanks's relationship, that meant that you guys got to stand him and got supported by some wonderful mares. And I know Anthony, Northern Media, are talking about a breed shaping stallion. I said Zoostar, but really it was Northern Media, the sire of him. Your Eduardo Coanco friendship was, you know, that's how that came about. They're very important, these relationships that you have with the breeders and the people that own the horses.
Yeah, as we all know, it's a people business, not a horse business, isn't it? And if you're fortunate enough that one of your friends has a very nice colt that's going to be maybe a good stallion, that friendship can go a long way.
Okay.
Didn't your brother-in-law have a share in Stormboy?
Yeah, I wasn't interested. The 27 million pulled me up.
Actually, Anthony, it's a nice segue to the next question for you. Talking about securing stallions, you've been involved. I listened to a podcast, if you haven't heard it, it's Connections Cast that you did a few years ago with Gus Rowland for TDN. I listened to it again the other day, but you talked about being involved in these bidding wars for stallions. Sam, you alluded to it as well, but you've ended up on both sides of a result. I know famously Redute's Choice is one. Can you tell us some of those stories briefly? Northern Media worked out well. Exceed and Excel as well comes to mind.
Yeah, we've all got underbidder stories, and they're not great ones, and they're not ones we like to think about that often. But thanks for reminding me, Jem.
I find them fascinating.
Yeah, I guess in all these negotiations, we all look at the horses, and there's so many farms playing on the obvious ones, on the Redute's Choice and Exceed and Excel, those sort of horses, and it comes a point where it sort of gets crazy numbers and doesn't make any sense, and you have to bow out. And certainly Exceed was a bit that case. Like it was the craziest day. It sort of the deal had come to a head, and Nick Moritis has his Sydney Fruit Markets has a big place there, a big Moritis fruit place, and across the road's Jerry Harvey's Harvey Norman. And I'd gone to Jerry and said, we really got to buy, do this deal, buy, exceed and excel. And Jerry was in, and Alec Head, who had Anabar, was in, and myself. And I cobbled together sort of something out of nothing. And we kept going over to Nick's office and seeing him, and then I think Henry Plumtree would come in, and we didn't know it was Henry, but it was Godolphin or Darley in those days. And there's back and forth and phone calls, and the numbers keep going up, and we started off at 10s and 12s, and we ratcheted up, and we got to 20s, and Jerry's tight at the best of times, and he was going pale, and I was just throwing in random bids as I walked out the door of money I didn't have. And anyway, we got told sort of finally that I think about 24 million that Godolphin had prevailed or something. It was some crazy number. And as I walked out disappointed and flat, Nick said to one of the guys there, he said, because he's a lot of potatoes, he said, give this fellow a bag of potatoes. Look after young Anthony. He's a bit flat. He's had a rough day. A bag of spuds. And I'm like, what? So I walked down and boot him a ute or whatever, the back of the ute, they throw a bag of potatoes in. And I shut throw it under the thing and drive out. And the security guard stops me and says, what do you got in the back of the ute? And I said, potatoes. He said, no, you can't take anything out of here unless you got the docket. And I said, there's no docket. Nick gave me a bag of potatoes. I said, Nick Rice. He said, Nick gives no one potatoes. I said, have you frigging potatoes? Drove home, no stallion, no potatoes, very little to show for it. There's some crazy old days, but we try to focus on the ones we win, not the ones we lose.
Fascinating. Bag of potatoes and exceed and excel. What a day. A question for everyone. Stallion making races can skyrocket a colt's value. How do you identify and target those? Can you give an example of where a win has influenced a purchase for all of you on the panel? Has there been a win that you've thought that's the horse we've got to go for? And on the back of that, are the Coolmore and the Slipper still the key races, or is a race like the Everest one that now you would target a colt if they were to win that race? Anyone? That's a question for everyone.
I suppose one thing is, I think you touched on it earlier, Anthony, and just the competitiveness of the stallion market. I mean, these horses are probably on all of your radars prior to, competing in a Golden Slipper, an Everest and a Coolmore. How much work is done with do you all use people who rate horses, Dan O'Sullivan's, all these sort of people, to identify these horses? Are you doing the work yourself? How are you identifying these colts so quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the breeders aren't silly, and you need to. I think absolutely that needs to be a priority when you're identifying the horses that you think might work. I think you can fall in the trap pretty easily of finding a horse that might really be a sucker, and when the breeders do a deep dive onto that horse, it mightn't have stacked up. So, yeah, I think the studs have really worked hard at identifying the right horses that do have a rating and do have a profile that are going to work. We lean on ratings guys. We used to have a relationship with the late Dean Lester, and he was great in identifying horses, not just stallions, even mares, even race fillies. He would sort of suggest, hey, this is a filly that rated through the roof at her last start, and you guys should have a look at her. And more often than not, they're right. And I think it's a really smart way of evaluating the level of stallions that might have a similar profile. Ratings guys do a deep dive on how the tracks were playing that day, and what was the rail advantage to not, and
the form in the race as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you just going back to Schwartz, for example, there was some narrative around the William Reid that when he won that day, and the rail was a bit hot, and that's fine. But afterwards, he applied that win as a higher rated performance than the winner of the Galaxy and the TJ Smith this year, off the back of sectional data and all the analysis that he's puts together. So I found that really interesting.
The other thing I was going to say, if you're looking at a colt and your ratings people or your team think that this colt's going to be a superstar, it can always get beaten by another colt, and all of a sudden you have to shift focus from the one you thought was a star to the one that's just beaten it. And so you might be watching a race thinking, this is the one we want to buy, and then it gets flogged by something else, and all of a sudden now you're chasing that one, but so is everybody else. So it's sometimes a knee-jerk reaction, but you have to do it in a calculated way.
We're going to move on to the next topic, which is launching a stallion for its career at stud. Lisa, your first cab off the rank with this one. You've launched several stallions in recent years. How do you prepare a stallion transitioning from racing to stud duties? What steps are taken to ensure that they're ready for the breeding season? Use it today as an example. A parade day like today, you potentially do it without them seeing a mare, so they're in the right mind frame and easier to handle. If it's light and condition off the track, you wouldn't parade it here at Oaklands. But what are those preparations and considerations you have?
Yeah, absolutely. It's different for every horse. I think some horses come off the track a little bit light, and you really need to wait and just it's your horse. You've sort of got to gauge when it's ready to be shown and paraded and that kind of thing. And like you say today, obviously all those stallions out there today that you're obviously not going to do covers, practice covers before you bring them out here for parading, things like that. But the main thing is, obviously they get off the track. You hope you can have at least a month or two off the track before they get to the point where they need to start covering mares. But it's basically it's a pretty relaxed, get them out, get them relaxed, get them into a routine, and a few covers beforehand just so they figure out what they're doing. Going for the right area instead of the ear hole tends to be helpful.
Sure why you looked at me when you said that, but all right.
But yeah, it's not really my department but it's pretty simple, sort of, just get them in the right frame of mind, get them covering, on easy mares that are sort of, I shouldn't say easy, sorry, but experienced mares, so that they have a good experience themselves, and it's good for them going into their first season of covering with a lot of confidence. Experience is probably also the wrong word, but. All right. Sam, Swettenham has introduced some new stallions as well to its roster recently. What are the key considerations when you're setting a service fee for a new stallion? And how do you position them in a competitive market?
It's actually a pretty tough one from our point of view to set them, because obviously different states have different expectations, different, if you've got a competitor by the same sire, similar race record, you have to be around that mark. But I think one thing that we learned, probably Highland Reel's a good example. If you price him too low, he won 7 Group 1s and he was 15 grand. He got good enough support, but I actually think if we'd priced him at 25, he would have got more support. So it can be a bit of a reverse. You don't go and buy the best washing machine because it's more expensive than the next one. It's because it's the best one. But I think sometimes you price them too low and you don't get the support because they're seen as subpar. You price them too high and you don't get the support because they're overpriced. So it's a little bit of market research. It's about knowing that you need to get that 120, 150 odd mares first year. And we all make mistakes with it, but I think being a little bit stronger is better, because you can always deal if you need to. But it is very, very difficult. And sometimes we're 50 to 70% away from each other when the team are talking about what we're going to price them at. You've got a horse like I'm Immortal who has McGaw win a $1 million showdown. You talked about not being reactive before on another topic, but you have to resist the urge sometimes, I'm sure, to react to graduate success, because then you've got to think of that long-term factor of keeping breeders in and wanting to send mares second and third season, etc. Yeah, absolutely. So we dropped his fee from 12.5 down to 8, and we're not a farm that deals a huge amount. So to drop something like that is a big thing for us, but it allows breeders to get in, allows them to make money, it allows them to continue breeding with a horse that's doing a really good job. So if you keep him at 12.5, you probably drop his book by 30%, but if you drop them down to 8, you get the numbers and the same amount of revenue coming through. So it's sort of that hot, crazy matrix that everyone knows about. It's like that, the sort of service fee, but also the amount of mares. The bell curve.
It must be you're talking about pricing the stallion, not setting them too high, not setting them too low. It must be a very sort of fine balance, because obviously you want people calling you don't want to have to be making every call to a breeder. If you had to choose one, which would you choose? Do you want your phone to ring, or do you want to call their phone? We always want to be us calling people, but if we're calling people and they say, oh, you're dreaming at that price, not a chance at all, it gets you get deflated quite quickly. So
I think if people are calling you and saying, why is it so cheap? You've priced it incorrectly. If they're saying, why is it so expensive? You've priced incorrectly. But ultimately, bell curve is probably a better analogy than my one. But if the bulk of the breeders agree with the pricing, then you've made the right price. But you need to hold that price firm for 3 or 4 years too. And that's the hard bit. If you price them a little bit too strong first year, we don't want to have to drop them back. So the fourth year, they're advertised at 50% less. So trying to hold firm but not knock back 200 people, because as everyone here would know, when you're knocking back breeders on a horse that's full, it's the worst experience. Like Inglis trying to knock back people back from Premier, you're saying to people, it's a nice horse, but it's not quite there. If we're knocking people back, you'd rather pot their firstborn child than knock them back from sending a mare to one of your stallions.
You abuse my child, don't you dare say bad things about my horse.
Exactly.
I know what you're talking about. Just there, we're talking about, breeders, mare owners who don't have any investment in the stallion. But obviously when stud farms secure a stallion, Macca, there's different sort of structures, and there's breeding rights and also shares that stud farms can sell. Have you found a structure that works for when selling a stallion, or does it depend? Are you talking breeders want something different in Victoria compared to New South Wales, you having experienced both states, or what do you find works for you?
Look, I think both scenarios work well and have their advantages. I think and we've certainly applied. I think as everyone has applied both scenarios onto stallions they've put together in the last few years. The share scenario is works well, I guess, for potentially that horse that the stud has gone and paid a significant amount for. One, to reduce risk for the stud, thereby you involve breeders by way of shares to become shareholders in that stallion, which they would deem as a worthwhile investment. They've got equity in the horse. There's a dividend there that they would look forward to in addition to the nominations they have. On the flip side, the breeding rights are a great initiative also, are a really affordable, accessible way into a stallion that you consider as a horse that you want to really support, not only through to year one, but right through its journey. And there's some great storylines around that. And I think from a stud point of view, both scenarios are really important to ensure you're getting the support into those tougher years, your years 2, 3, and 4. But yeah, I think for example, the breeding rights, which everyone would hear a lot about these days, and a lot of studs are doing them. If that's a stallion that you have time for and you consider as a future champion stallion, that's a really affordable entry point to get involved in that stallion and have access to that stallion, no matter what level it gets to.
Anthony, with Southport Tycoon standing here in Victoria at Whitton, how did you determine his initial service fee for this season, and what factors influenced you to stand him here? Is it as simple as his best wins were here, Written Tycoon stands down the road? What factors influence those?
Yeah, certainly they're important factors. As I said outside, he could have stood at a high fee, I think, in the Hunter, and Ole Kirk won 2 Group 1s. He won a 1400 metre and a mile Group 1, and he stands at 55 in the Hunter. And I'd see Southport with a very similar profile, albeit a 1200 metre and mile Group 1 winner. But we sort of seriously thought he was a 40 to 50 Hunter stallion. But the investment in the farm in Victoria and what we're doing down here, it's a bigger play, and I think his wins are here. The breeders here have sort of really done so well with Written Tycoon and figured him out and made Written Tycoon so successful in what he is. So to take him away from Victoria, I thought would be a real snub of the industry down here. And I think as a long-term play, the investment, from my point of view, into the Victorian industry, it's really important we back it up with some good stallions. When we sort of bought the farm down here, we came down here, we bought Nakanian Star Witness, and we've kept adding to it, but I really need to, stump up now and really add to the top and really ratchet it up with an important stallion. I think he's that horse. So, and then setting the fee, yeah, it's kind of where you are in the market and just pricing him. You look at Cylinder at 40 grand. I think he's sort of where he is and how he fits, and you look at the other farms and the competition where you are. And I think, everyone's looking about the Victorian industry. The stallion strength in Victoria this season, and the number of first season sires and the strength of the Victorian stallions on offer is every bit as good as the Hunter. So, from me sitting in the Victorian Widden Vic, there's, if you're looking for first season sires, you don't need to put them on a truck. There's really good options here in Victoria, as you've just seen. And, I don't know if there's 9 new stallions in the Hunter, but there's 9 really nice first season sires in Victoria. So the breeders down here do have a lot of options, and I think that competition means the service fees are very competitive and lower than what they would be if there wasn't that competition. So it's a really good year for the Victorian breeders to jump on these new horses and make the most of it.
Lisa, you've got a very, very important role this year in launching Broadsiding and Traffic Warden. They're both standing in the same barn in New South Wales. How do you go about building a broodmare band to send to those stallions, particularly where they're priced at different points?
Yeah, obviously 2 quite different sort of stallions. Broadsiding obviously going to stud at a higher fee, and Traffic Warden, as you said, going at a bit lower. So I think they find their own market to a degree, but obviously getting the horses out, getting the people to the stallions is really important. I mean, Broadsiding sells himself more so than a horse like Traffic Warden, who didn't win a Group 1. However, he was unlucky a couple of times. He probably should have won a Group 1 at least once. Barriers kind of beat him, but when you go out there and look at both of them, they're both outstanding looking physical horses. So getting the people out there to see both of them, Broadsiding, he's fully booked and has been for a few months really. And Traffic Warden's just about there now. But as soon as people see Traffic Warden, they go, well, why wouldn't I? He's just an outstanding physical. He's, commercially what the market's after. He was early speed. He went on as a 3-year-old. And he's by, one of the leading stallions in Victoria at the moment, and Street Boss, who's obviously got, the amazing horse in Animo at stud as well. So it's a chance for breeders to get into a horse like that at a different level. And they both fit the market in different ways. So it's just a matter of getting the breeders to see the horses and pick which ones they like.
Can I ask a quick question? Lisa, why did you decide to stand them both in the Hunter?
Oh, you're asking the prickly questions, Sam. Well, because there's 9 new stallions in Victoria. Oh, well, we kind of did. And, to be fair, we didn't know that Gaiath and Blue Point weren't coming this year. So... okay.
That's a timely clear of the throat, Lisa.
A bit of no. Blue Point we knew wasn't going to come this year, just on the back of huge books in Ireland the last couple of years, and he was showing signs of needing a break. Gaiath, well, the UK, the Godolphin side of the business over there own him, and we lease them off that business, so what they say goes. So unfortunately they decided he needed a break this year. In hindsight, perhaps we should have stood Traffic Warden, but we also have to be mindful of the fact that we have 5 other stallions on the roster here, and there's 9 new stallions in Victoria. So we've got a second season horse in Cylinder, who obviously was a really, really good horse. First season he stood for 40,000. He's got, huge credentials. He's a Silver Slipper, a Todman winner, second in the Golden Slipper, and then he won the Newmarket, beating Imperatriz and Bella Nipotina, just saying. We've got to focus on those horses as well. So Traffic Warden was sort of we've got Street Boss down here as well. And we knew Traffic Warden was a horse that would appeal to people when they saw him. And the Hunter Valley is the best place probably in that regard to show them off. We get a bit more traffic up there. there'll be a few people that complain that we didn't have a first season sire here this year, but we certainly have more coming next year. So watch this space.
Well rehearsed.
I think I know the answer to this, but certainly from a sales point of view, what we've found in recent times is that it is all about type, and what people want to see in the sale ring is very much a physical specimen before the pedigree. Would you agree that when choosing a stallion, type has become the number one thing over the time rather than potentially the mating? So we've become so commercialised in this sale ring that it's all about matching up to get that physical. Have you found that that's become the number one thing, and is that to the detriment of our breeding industry?
Yeah, I don't think it is necessarily the number one thing. Obviously, it's hugely important, and everyone's trying to breed the best type they can. But if you don't have the race record and you don't have the pedigree, the type, people won't come and look at the horse. So you've got to have something. And if they're not a Group 1 winner, if they've got a wow performance, if a horse sticks in your head and you saw him win one day, or that's something that really said, wow, people come and look at him, then they like him. And if there's a big enough pedigree to get their interest, they'll come and look at him. But yes, you need a nice type. If you don't have a really solid type of horse, it's going to make the job hard, because it is very commercial, as we know, and so many of the breeders are breeding commercially. But you need more than that.
I'll just add, James, it's really interesting with a horse like, for example, Harry Angel. He, as Anthony said, we definitely, we do like to like what we see. And with Harry Angel, his first season here, even though he was by Dark Angel, and a lot of people probably didn't know how good he was, because he's such a European stallion, but he was a world champion sprinter, Harry. But when he came out here, he's not your typical looking sprinter. He's quite long. He's got a good hip, but he's a little bit tubular, and he's not overly big. But he has really, obviously, done a fantastic job over here, and it's starting to pay dividends now. People have sort of worked out the types that he throws, and it shows in the sales ring that even though they're not exactly what they physically look for, it doesn't matter, because he's the type of horse, he gets that type, and that's just what he gets, and they run. So you've just, it is definitely a commercial market in that everybody wants to buy the best looking horse, which is a no-brainer. But once you figured out a type for a horse, like even Street Cry or like Too Darn Hot, yeah.
And probably prime example would be a Seamus Award at Rosemont.
Yeah, absolutely.
He doesn't get you a belting type of horse, but people know that is the type of horse that he's got very good statistics, but that plainer potentially type of horse
Bigger,
is Seamus Award, so they can go and buy with confidence.
Yeah, same as Kermadec.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think it's, I think it's really important. I think when you're walking around the weanling sales this week and the yearling sales, if you've got a good-looking mare and you mate her to a good-looking stallion, chances are you're going to breed a good-looking foal. And I know it sounds really simple by admission, but I think it can be as simple as that. I think start with a good-looking mare and then find a good-looking stallion and mate her accordingly. So, I'm a big believer in the stallion should be a good-looking horse, and one that you look at and visualise what you're going to breed with.
This is the final question in this category, and it's probably even one even the audience could answer, but is when you launch a first season sire and you're trying to generate that interest and bookings for it, is still the traditional method of getting them to come up and look, you've all mentioned getting them to come and see the stallion, and that will convince someone to send them there. Is that still the way that is the best marketing? When we come to marketing these first season sires, is that still the most effective way, getting people to come and look at the stallions?
Yeah, if you can. Marketing and launching Cogburn hasn't been as easy as that. Obviously, he's in Kentucky. He's over there, so you might have seen some of the videos we've done. We've tried to give it Australian context and put it back into people's phones or lounge rooms, or and just get the Australian viewpoint. There's no point some yank breeder telling us about a horse. So being lucky enough at Keeneland, there was 20 odd Aussie breeders there, taking them out to see Cogburn, getting their feedback to camera and putting that out there was really effective. And we got over 100 bookings to Cogburn and no one's seen him, on the basis that they're confident in what they're hearing and the guys they trust. John Muir's not going to talk rubbish, and the sort of Scott Holcombs and the people have just so. Yes, you'd love to have people standing on your farm, sitting around your kitchen table, talking about their horses, looking at your stallions, but not always possible. And so you've got to just find an angle, and it's not whatever it is to try and give them the confidence and give them the education and be around it. And if they've seen the horse at Flemington or Randwick winning a Coolmore or a Slipper, they don't need to come to the farm. But otherwise, you've got to find an angle and find a way.
I was going to say 30 for 30 for Schwartz. That's a marketing ploy. I mean, and is that working? Is that working, Maka?
Yeah, it has. It's worked a little too well. So now it's how generous do you want to be to people that might be outside that 30. But listen, I think we're all in the business of being fair, and ultimately you want to launch a stallion first year and make a real go of it. And I've learned that from Anthony. Really is. One of the first things Anthony said to me when I started working for him is, we're in the business of being fair, and let's, and let's, what's the word? Let's not stuff up here by trying to be too cute, So I think as sort of stud masters, as senior people at studs, we've got an obligation to work with the breeders and be fair and be a little bit left field and throw some initiatives out there that are appealing. I'm all for that, not get too cute. I think if you can be as fair as you can, you're going to get rewarded back the other way. So I think I think most farms are that way inclined and have that approach for sure.
I think COVID taught us a little bit too about launching, particularly shuttle stallions. Nobody could come and see the horse, even though it was a colonial horse, and doing 360 views of the horse, discussing faults, discussing type, and not broad spectrum, but just saying this horse is this size, you need this mare. And COVID made us sell in that way and made us discuss in that way, which has really helped from our point of view, and I'm sure Anthony's point of view, for a horse like Cogburn, because you have to show people everything, because if they get out and they're not what they think they are, they just cancel the booking and move on.
Okay, we move into stallion management. This is our last category. Only a few questions left, everyone. But Lisa, Darley, you've managed the long-term careers of some outstanding stallions. Lawnmower, Exceed and Excel, recently retired. And obviously Street Boss is getting on now. He's had his fertility issues. How do you manage those horses to ensure their welfare and I guess their commercial appeal in the twilight of their stud careers?
Yeah, we've been lucky with Street Boss in that his twilight has been some of his best years at stud, with obviously some serious horses in the last few years on the track and going to stud. So, but he's a horse that he's never been an easy horse fertility-wise, but obviously as the years go on, they tend to get harder. So, we manage all our horses fairly conservatively. We like to, particularly first season stallions, we tend to only book 120, 130 to them initially, and then basically wait to see what they're capable of regarding fertility and libido. And then once we know that, if the fertility is really good and they're happy to cover it 20 or 30 more mares, then we'll carry on with that during the season. But a horse like Street Boss, he physically these days only likes to do 2 a day. back in the day he did 2 to 3. Most stands can do 4 or 3. Sporadically sort of thing. So if they have those sorts of stands that they can do, those 3 a day consistently, and their fertility is good, then you obviously tend to cover a few more mares. But a horse like Street Boss, he's always been sort of 50% or a bit more, conception per cover, or even a little bit less these days. But so 2 a day, we vet the mares through close to ovulation as we can, and that increases our chances. And obviously, the younger the mare, the more fertile the mare, he's a lot more more successful. So we just manage them as best we can for obviously getting the most mares in foal. If you did 130 mares with him a year, you'd get 30 in foal, as opposed to doing 80 a year and you'll get 47.
Anthony, congratulations on Zoo Star's imminent crowning of Australia's champion sire. Do you change his management in any way moving forward? Not now that he's Australia's champion stallion. He's obviously been a stallion that's commanded a very high service fee for a number of years. But is there any way you manage him differently than you have so far?
Yeah, he's moved into the house. He's in the bedroom.
No. Are you or Katie out?
Yeah, it's crazy. You've got a horse worth 79 million and he's standing in his stable going to his paddock and
he cooks him bacon and eggs every morning and
plays the violin. At the end of the day, there's only so much you can do. But managing the book and managing the horse, it really doesn't matter how much they're worth. You have to look after and know your horse. And if a trainer runs a horse when he's not right, you can stuff him up. As a stud master covers the stallion who's not right, you'll do the same. And if you overwork them, it doesn't. They're for everything they are. They're highly strung, but they're finicky animals, and it won't take much to turn their toes up. And having been in the stallion barn with General Nadeem and some of the quirky stallions we've had, and spending day and night in there trying to work out what it is that will get them to cover this mare on frigging Christmas Eve or, Friday afternoon, or I'd really like to go and watch the Cox Plate this afternoon, and you're standing in the breeding shed for 3 hours because General doesn't want to cover that mare. So you do need to have your horses fit, and I think whilst the breeders love to see a big shiny horse, I like to see a really fit, lean stallion, and I'm big on that, and I try to make sure our stallions are very fit. You need to keep them happy, and you need to understand what their workload is, Lisa said. And if you can balance all that and sometimes say no to the money, it's shit, if we cover this mare, we get that service fee, she's a nice mare, but it takes some strength to say no and look after your horse, and that's ultimately, I think, as a stud master, the tough decisions you have to make. Just being around the stands, and I still spend time in the breeding shed and with the stallions covering, and having really good people in the shed and knowing those horses is so important, and that's your main job as a stud master.
And then you throw in the fact that a lot of these stallions shuttle as well. Zoo Star has shuttled Anthony, but Sam, what about your insights on ensuring the fertility and libido remains strong across a long season? Wooded shuttles and Tornado used to. How do you manage those and ensure that, I guess, they're able to do both hemispheres?
Yeah, I think like Anthony said, it's about knowing the horse and any sign of change or taking a bit longer to cover or less interest, you pull up stumps pretty quickly or change tact in some way, shape or form. But I think the other important part is telling the breeders about it as well. They're going to hear about it if something's a bit slower or fertility's down a bit, but just tell them. Just say, look, he's not going that well. You might want to just have a backup, or we can offer you this one. I think the communication with the breeder is really important because they're not machines. They are there to do a job, but they sometimes get a bit tired. And Tornado, when he was shuttling, he did 1 year 210 with us and 200 up north, which wasn't too much for him in any way, shape or form. But we probably wouldn't want to press that matter again and again and again and do 400 a year when they're shuttling. So I think just making sure that any time you see a sign of change, a bit like getting home to your husband or wife or partner and you see that they're probably not in the best mood, then you probably don't try and cover. It would be the advice.
I knew when the question started with managing fertility and libido and it was your name next to it, I would get there eventually. James, you're up next, I think.
Ryan, I think we touched on it earlier, but second, third, and fourth years can be incredibly hard. Which is the hardest? Do you think to attract mares to a stallion? And how do you incentivise broodmare owners to support those stallions? I mean, we look at foal shares and all the rest, but you've obviously got your biggest investment is the stallion, and maintaining that stallion's sort of stand in the market without sort of casting him, reducing his value.
Yeah, there's no real secret sauce to that, other than I think it's important that the studs maintain the confidence in the stallion, continue the support, aggressive marketing, heavy promotion of the foals, heavy promotion of the weanling sales. But back to my point earlier on how helpful and important it is that stallion might have breeding right holder support or shareholder support that allows them to cover a base level of mares in those tricky years 2, 3, and 4. I think that's really important. But if you work hard enough and you create the right energy around your stallion in those difficult years, I look at a horse like Animo Lease, and the energy around him and the chat around him at the weanling sales is really positive, and everyone's a big rap on the Animo foals, and I dare say he'd be nearly full, off the back of that. Jack, I know the same with you, Ant. If you do a good job as a stud master, as a stud, and create that positive chat. I think you go a long way. But yeah, it's really important, I think, to have that breeding right and shareholder support in those difficult years, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, and the stallion farm has to remain confident. I remember trying to sell fourth season Toast and Stardoms, and by God, it was hard to remain positive. Lisa, what's the biggest myth or misunderstanding you hear from breeders or buyers about stallion performance or fertility?
I would say the biggest myth would be that you need to be the 6 a.m. cover. So, there's a lot of breeders, you would be surprised at how many people want that early 6 a.m. or 11 a.m. cover. And the statistics tell us, I can't speak for everyone else, but obviously we have our own stats that doesn't actually matter.
It's not a myth, it's a fact. If you turn up the breeding shed with a case of beer, they definitely go and foal.
Do you, like you talked, Sam, you mentioned just before about being on the front foot with breeders and making sure that if a stallion might be unable to cover a mare, are there myths and rumours that come from those type of things? You walk on the farm and they say, I think he might be struggling with his fertility. Is there a myth or rumours that you have to combat in those regard?
I think it's like any rumours. It's that if you don't tackle them head on, then there's lots of rumours about you, Gemma, obviously. But if you don't tackle them head on, then there's going to be purple monkey dishwasher down the line. So our policy is just be open, honest, and tell everyone. But if you try and hide it and try and change things around, then someone's going to find out, and it gets a lot worse. You'd rather just tackle and tell everyone what's going on, and that's the way to go. Unlike what Lisa said.
It's usually the farriers who start the rumours, isn't it, Rodney?
Well, the truck drivers. The truck drivers are the best. They're the biggest gossipers in the industry.
I
drivers.
disagree. I think farriers are the best.
Okay.
You just give them all a carton of beer and they won't talk.
We might open it up to questions. Thank you for everyone for sticking around. If you have any questions for our panel, please put your hand up and I'll bring the microphone around to you.
How will that shake up the stallion industry? Are you going to find a lot of people rushing their schnitzels to market, in the stallion paddock?
And he's going to just sell more knobs to Zoo Star, I think. No, but first of all, what an unbelievable stallion, and that was really sad news today. He's become a real icon, Schnitzel, and thinking of everyone at Arrowfield, that's sad news. But what a legacy he'll leave behind, that horse, for sure. I suppose you're probably best to answer that one, given you've got a stallion in that space.
Yeah, I guess it's pretty well known that Snitzel had struggled last year with a liver or kidney problem, and I think it'd been an ongoing issue. John Massara had said this season they'd hoped to serve a book of sort of 40-odd mares. So I don't think there was a lot of mares sort of committed to Snitzel to rehome. There are a good number of sons. Of course, we've got Trapeze Artist, Switzerland, Shinzo, Russian Revolution.
Lofty Strike.
Seamus Award, Lucky Strike. Lofty Strike, sorry. And there's plenty of others out there. So lots of sons of Snitzel at stud already. And I guess that legacy will live on. And, the job he's done as a sire and now as a broodmare sire, and I'm sure he'll do with his sons at stud. There'll be lots of opportunity to still breed to the sire line. And, he's been a great, stalwart and servant of the industry, and I'm sure he's, from a personal point of view, everyone's got a good story where, it's been either a horse that's, they've had involvement with that's changed their life in some way, whether it be in the sale ring or the guys that have worked with him, and plenty of different stories. So it's a really good night to reflect on him and on what he's done for all of us.
For Lisa, so we had Earthlight and Victor Ludorum, both sons of Shamadale. One was a sprinter, one was a miler. Why did Victor Ludorum come back and Earthlight not, especially with Earthlight selling $500,000 yearling here?
Good question, Tom.
Lisa, tell us that. Why do it?
Pretty simple answer, Tom. Victor Ludorum is very fertile and Earthlight is unfortunately not. So, unfortunately, apart from the fact that he has had a stakes winner here and he did sell a $475,000 yearling, he is unfortunately not fertile enough. And he, a good-looking 2-year-old type, he was really popular, and it's quite disappointing that his fertility didn't stand up to what we'd hoped, because he could have, he could have been a very exciting horse. But unfortunately, with those sorts of horses, people jump off them very quickly if they're not proven at that stage and they're not fertile. So,
can you share a moment when a stallion made it, when you were just like, yeah, I nailed that one?
I back in my years with Anthony, I remember we had Sebring and Northern Meteor in their first. They went to stud in the same year, and and there was I think there was a period sort of between May through to end of July where Northern Meteor had a winner every week, and I think he broke the record for 2-year-old winners. I think he broke the record for 2-year-old winners, basically. Like, he did every Wednesday Canterbury meeting, Saturday meeting. There was this 2-year-old winner by Northern Meteor, and I remember we'd sort of catch up on the Monday in the office and go, shit, it's non-stop.
It did take us a while to get there. The first 6 months was pretty lean.
It was pretty quiet, yeah. I bet he got humming.
Yeah, so it was a sort of a drought until I think after the Easter yearling sale with Northern Meteor.
I remember that.
And then it all happened, and that was like an overwhelming feeling, because we were all in. He was going to be a really good stallion, and we're like, where are these horses? We're hearing good things. I guess, be careful saying this room, but with a young stallion, you turn up the Magic Millions, and Zoostar gets the Magic Millions winner in his first crop. That's a pretty good day. You nailed it. And you never know when those days are going to come. When he had the trifecta in the Coolmore, Macca was crying, but we were still Sunlight had been Hussein. But there are those days in this game that are very, very good, and the high is so high they make up for all the other bad days. But we hang on for those and look for those. And as a stud master, there's some really kind of personally satisfying days when you sit back on a Saturday night, have your steak, and think, yeah, that was a good day.
How do you guys weigh up potentially investing in maybe broodmares or race fillies from a sales market in terms of maybe a young stallion or a stallion that you've already got And how do you weigh that process up, I guess?
From our point of view, if we're buying a new stallion or if a stallion's really on the rise, we'll buy mares specifically for them at a value that's commensurate to what they're standing for. We won't buy an $800,000 mare and send it to a $10,000 stallion. It's sort of like buying a Ferrari and parking it at the commission flats. But we'll also alter our buying patterns depending on how something's going. If a stallion's flying, we'll go and buy some really nice mares for them. But also we might recycle some mares with a stallion that hasn't worked necessarily and try that with the next one. But ultimately, if we're buying a stallion for, let's say, $5 or $10 million, you're probably spending another few $1 million on mares on top and sometimes polluting those mares, and sometimes the stallion's worth zero and the mare's worth zero, and you're in the hole for 8 to 13 million at certain times. So it doesn't always work, and you can pollute some really good mares, but trying to buy the right mares for the right stallion to get them going, I think is very important.
I will say, if a stallion's a good stallion, he'll be a good stallion. If a stallion's a bad stallion, it doesn't matter how many mares you buy them. And we've seen that where people have thrown truckloads and mega millions at a stallion. If he's not going to work, he's not going to work. And there's plenty of stories where they've come from nowhere if they're good stallions. Vinny's a case in point. He covered a lot of polo mares and Written Tycoon. Yeah, I mean, honestly. I'm pleased to say that Southport will get a lot better mares than Written Tycoon ever saw in his first 5 years.
I think Wooden Bassett, you mentioned there, Sam. Yeah, I think he covered some pretty modest mares in France at €6,000 or €8,000. And now look at the fee he's standing for. So yeah,
you mentioned Fupeg, like he's covered every good
correct.
mare in the
He
country.
paid $90 million for him and sent him every blue-blooded mare in this under the sun, and it didn't work. But then you get the freak stallions that are, what we call upgraders, who, the Vinnies and the Written Tycoons and the Wooden Bassets and the Encosta de Lagos that all come through and prove that they're serious upgraders of mares. And I find those horses really cool.
Yeah. So to answer your question, just work on your mating and make sure your mating's right and the mare suits a stallion physically and on paper, and it'll carry you a long way. But you don't know where the next champion stallion's going to come from.
Conscious of time, but Lisa, with Standing Animo first season last year and Traffic Warden this year, and staring down the barrel of maybe having a very nice street boss in Tentris, does it worry you that you could be staring at 3 Sons of Street Boss in 3 to 4 years?
I hope we're staring at 5, Will. 5 would be better than 1, assuming they all are, some of them are successful. I think, that like Anthony said before, it's hard enough to get 1, let alone 5. So you take them where you can find them and hope that they can do the job for you.
If you got 5, you might stand one in Victoria. That'd be great.
Possibly. Maybe not now.
John Massara always just say you can never have more than a good, or was it too much of a good thing? And
I don't think John Massara came up with that quote, did he?
No, did he? Yeah, well.
He's not,
Yeah, well.
he's very clever, but not that one. Have we got one more question?
So this is a question for Anthony and Sam. So with the son of Schnitzel, like obviously people have been saying that they haven't been very successful throughout the years. How do you guys try and promote them and kind of win them over to the public?
Oh, it's easy. You just say you've got Schnitzel's best son. He's his highest rated. He's won more Group 1s than him, and he's a beauty. He's the world's highest rated sprinter, so it's not that hard.
I think type's a big thing too. Like, you come out and say if a certain sireline's not working that well, then magically the one that you're standing might look a little bit different to those ones, or might be you can find an angle with Highland Reels. Probably an example for us. We stood him on behalf of Coolmore at Elstrom Harada son. Everyone's saying 2 failed stallions. Probably not the end of the story I was going to get to. That's the best outcome, but he was a generation behind that. So we thought, generation behind, we might be, on the right leg, which maybe we weren't. But I think there's always a way to make sure that people are confident and making sure that you're confident in your product as well.
Thank you everyone for sticking around for the seminar. You can also watch this back. We're going to release it next week on our social media and also on YouTube and Vimeo. Thank you to AgriFutures for their support. Thank you to the panel, James Price, who I neglected to introduce at the start, my colleague. If you have any issues this week at the Great Southern Sale, James Price is the guy to come speak to. Thank you everyone. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you hopefully next year with another seminar.